Good morning. Thanks for showing up for today. A while back, it was when I was getting my master's in conflict management, I had a course called Apologies, Forgiveness, Reconciliation. And I asked the professor if I could plagiarize his material. His name is Dr. Robert Peterson. He taught at 3 or 4 universities about every 4 years. And in the in-between years, some other people would do it, but I fortunately got it. He was the brainchild who created it. And it became the backdrop. Now I've done it maybe 20 times since then. So it's a bit more of my own, but I just want to give credit where credit is due. And it's been life-changing. One of the things I realized in the course, I grew up in all my school years, never heard about resolving conflict. In my graduate studies, never was taught how to resolve conflict. And in the church world, I hardly ever remember anything going to a conference or a class or midweek about resolving conflict. And the first time I heard something really taught about it is when I was teaching it. And it was after painful experiences that made me think, I want to go back to school and get this education and so forth. But I think it would have been the most important class I would have ever taken in my life. And I think you might be able to come to a similar conclusion of the value of investing in your personal and professional relationships. And everything we talk about this morning will work in the workplace, home, in the church, works in society as well. So we're going to look at 4 categories: conflict competence, apologies, forgiveness, and reconciliation. So that's a picture of me and my wife teaching this kind of material, but in a marriage seminar in Palm Springs back in 2014. And the photographer took this picture and caught my wife with that big smile when I said something. I said, Tricia and I have only had 3 conflicts in our entire marriage. But we've had each of them about 500 times. So we do have reoccurring conflicts, and that happens largely because either we're not self-aware, we're not aware of dynamics in the way our life was formed, and who we've become in relationship to who others have become, and we'll talk about that today. Well, what's this?
This is the Creative Monster. Hello! And we're here to tell you all about the word conflict. Conflict! Right, conflict. You guys ready to show conflict? Ready! Here we go. Creative Monster showing us conflict. Not sure you understand. We need to show everyone conflict. Conflict! Right, I'm afraid that wasn't conflict. No conflict. No, you see, a conflict is 2 people fight or disagree about something, and they have a conflict. Oh, conflict. We're ready to try again. Here we go. The 2-headed monster is now going to show us conflict. Take 2. It's like the other one wants the same thing. This could be some conflict. Oh, shit. Look, that was very nice. That was lovely, actually. You were sharing. That warms the cockles of my heart. But listen, I'm fuzzy to conflict. That was not conflict. No conflict. No conflict. I'm just sorry it wasn't. I'm not conflict. Disagreeing something. What? We disagree. We're arguing about something. So we're having a conflict. 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 Conflict.
Anyway, I want to keep it light today because this subject matter can be heavy. And especially because I want you to think about something throughout our time this morning. And as you engage the material, and by the way, the slides will be available as well. But as you engage the material, think about a past or present conflict with someone that was important to you. Maybe you still don't have that conflict resolved. It's looming. I actually have probably counted around a dozen conflicts I've had that did not get sorted out. People moved in different directions, went to different places over the course of 43 years as a Christian. And I had one of those reacquaintance with one of those conflicts. Somebody got very ill and they decided to reach out, and we had a wonderful time. So it's been reduced from 12 to 11 as we talk through what happened 25 years ago. So it can happen, but it really helps to know ourselves and know some skills, and hope that what you reflect on in the past or present, this will be helpful material. So I want to let you know that the best stuff in the world ever written about resolving conflict comes from the Bible. And the best stuff about laws and about process and who can facilitate mediation and arbitration comes from the Bible. There are other societies that develop some really good things that I actually incorporate into my work, but the most ancient and reliable is the Bible. Matter of fact, it informed systems, justice systems, both in Europe with having representation in Magna Carta, but also in declarations, in constitutions in Western societies. You can actually see the thread going all the way back to the Old Testament, beginning with the conversation with Jethro talking to Moses in Exodus 18, Deuteronomy 1, Moses reflecting on the system that he built 40 years later, based on that advice from Jethro. And then in Numbers and Deuteronomy, there's really great stuff that ends up being picked up again in the New Testament with Jesus. So it does come from the Bible related to due process, impartiality, justice and representation, and things like that. So today, and there's 4 pillars, whether it be in a family, an organization, or the church. A group of people usually have shared values. So when somebody acts outside of those 4 values, you can have conflict. There should be processes. If people can't resolve their own conflict between each other, there should be third-party neutrals detached from the situation, not able to take a side because of their commitment to be objective. And then also the goal would be justice. And justice does not mean punishment. It could mean just mercy as well. But that all sides are happy with an outcome. What's really interesting is where you are at geographically. It can affect the way that the conflict cascades into the community. So in cities and towns, there are more resources. Trish and I were in Cook County for 18 years before we moved to North Carolina, and back in Chicago, and she became a certified mediator. And there's all sorts of resources in big cities, whether it be lawyers or mediators, or arbitrators, negotiators, and all that. But the downside is there's more power dynamics, who you know. And in the legal system in Chicago, pretty much every single dispute in a divorce, like massively favors the women for some reason, okay? And so there's a power differential and preconceived notions about who's right, who's wrong, who has the right for custodians when it comes to kids. And typically that might even be right, that the women deserve more of a just settlement. And maybe on an average that's appropriate, but it's very different city to city. And politics can play a big difference in 2 things too in a big city. When you're rural, you have a lower risk of conflict. Now we live on an 8-acre farm, and we're far away from our neighbors. We have to have a minimum of 5 acres each. So we can't see any house from our house. So we don't have conflicts. We have conflict with one of our neighbors. And if we're resolving it peacefully, as a whole road of 12 houses, we have one that most of us are in conflict with, but we're resolving it peacefully. So, but rurally, you're isolated, you're less accountable. You could get involved in really bad behavior and nobody would know it, right? So, and then islands and villages are interesting. They have the strongest sense of community, but unresolved conflicts affect them. So when I was consulting in the church in Hawaii, Oahu Church of Christ in 2012, I learned a lot about the Hawaiian story going back 1,000 years. I'm a real history nut, I'm a nerd, but I learned something. There is a concept called Ho'oponopono that goes back at least 1,300 years in the Polynesian Islands and the Hawaiian Islands. and it means to make things right. And one of the implementations of it is you have a conflict on an island, you have a bunch of people anywhere near the conflict that's either part of it or saw it. They'll sit around, have a family conference, there's a kahuna, a priest, on the big kahuna sometimes, will facilitate it. The net will be in the middle of the table, it'll be tied up in knots, and as they share different parts of the conflict, the kahuna will say, oh, that was very helpful what you said or what you saw. Go untie one of the knots. And they will do that for a while. And at some point in time, the kahuna will say, well, here's my burden. Now they have to do that, but here's why. If you're on an island, you're going to keep running into each other if you're in a conflict. You can't afford to have something just continue to play out. Even when I've made 5 or 6 trips to Oahu, I'll go to a Whole Foods on one side of the island and see somebody I know, and then 3 hours later be at Starbucks on the other side and I see the same person. It's just the way things are in the island world. So, but anyway, I've incorporated some of the stuff I learned from that situation. So let's talk about conflict on this, okay? It's about managing yourself. You're being self-aware, listening, and being answered. That's not a sophisticated definition, but that'll work. That's a really good start. We can get in conflicts with ourselves, with our friends, with our family, with our coworkers, and that just, it happens in all those domains over time. I want to make a point that conflict is not always your enemy. So let me ask you, what's a good thing about conflict? Or can be a good thing about conflict? It can clear the air, okay? You can use it to surface stuff that's been there for a while, to clear the air, very good, yeah. Pardon me? Yeah, it can lead to self-reflection. You might not have been self-reflecting until the conflict took place, yes. Others do. Change your perspective. Yeah, changing your perspective. If you're in a conflict and you're actually, processing it with that person together, you might go, oh, I did not know that. I was living on assumptions that were not true. So, yeah, yes. Yes, right. When you resolve conflict, you can be closer than you ever were before the conflict was manifest. And those are great answers, and we probably have those answers from our own experience. We can remember things where that was the case. So we have to ask ourselves in the middle of the conflict, what am I feeling? Feelings are really a big deal. I think about the book of Job and Job's story. Job is feeling stuff all throughout that. From the moment his friends started speaking, he had feelings. First, they were just keeping their mouth shut. Things were fine. At least he could, have some sympathy from his friends. But then they started to engage. And not only was he suffering a tragedy, he was now in conflict with his friends. And it plays out over 30 plus chapters. And so, so what am I feeling? What's going on? I'm angry. I'm mad. I'm not going to take it anymore. This is it. This is the last time. Sometimes it exposes you to fear, at risk in a relationship, at risk in a job, and then sometimes even embarrassment. And so one of the things I've done in my church work as a consultant is whenever there's a high stakes conversation and a group is going to discuss something, I set the rules of conduct. And I communicate them in advance, make sure everybody agrees with them, what we're going to do if somebody violates that covenant for the meeting. Because what's interesting is one outburst in a meeting can not only ruin a meeting, they can ruin relationships forever. I've seen people cross the line with their emotional storms and thinking they have a right to pontificate and express all this stuff, and then be so embarrassed that you never see them again. So you really need good order, good process, facilitation, and guidelines. Why should I care about resolving a conflict? You don't want to get in a trap is one, because that's what happens. We don't think well when we're in a conflict. Sometimes we're in a trap, we're ruminating, we're believing the worst about the other person, we're replaying what had happened. By the way, when we do that, we tend to alter the story subconsciously without even knowing it. We are modifying the narrative and it's no longer accurate. And we get into despair and it kind of spirals us. And so if we want to preserve our relationships, stay out of those traps, that's why we pursue conflict competence. And if we are conflict competent, but the other person isn't, objectively isn't, that's why you get a third party to help out. So you don't want the aftermath. Like I mentioned a friend, I told you that 35 years ago, the relationship was over just in one moment. And now it's not over and back. But I would sure like to have these skills long time ago. There's lots of aftermaths over the course of any ministry over a period of time. So, and we want to all be feel safe and have peace, shalom in our church. So the sources of conflict. Have you ever seen unhealthy ambition in the church? Yeah, right. Okay. You ever seen when some people want one thing and other people want another? I was in a situation last year where some people wanted to make sure there was a big cross on the stage, and a lot of people didn't, and it became a big deal. So sometimes we just want different things. And of course, it was a difference of taste, musical styles. That's a big in church, right? And so forth. So injustice is a source of conflict. There's something that wasn't handled right. I think one of the things, I wrote a book that came out recently. It's called At the Crossroads, an exploration of a flagship church of a discipling movement. It's about the Crossroads Church. It covers a 15-year period. But one of the things I learned in the story is there were people in the church that fell into a particular kind of sin. They were dealt with church discipline. But if it was a leader, they were dealt with silence, and they were just kind of moving on. That's not right. That's injustice. Things should be, if all things are equal, they should be consistent, right? And there's all sorts of ways we can have differences. Difference of culture. Some cultures, people are very animated. They're loud, they're intense, but it's not sinful. If people don't feel unloved when they're all loud, I'm not going to name any cultures, but I'll tell you, it's reinforced by my experiences that there are some that are just like that. And what we have to do when we engage with somebody that's so loud and animated and intense, and don't you understand, is that they're ready to go out and have a glass of wine with you afterwards, because for them it was nothing. It's just the way they talk. But for somebody that's not used to that, it's like, this was devastating. And it's called a social style. And social styles usually come from either a family of origin or a culture of origin. So are we self-aware? In the book of Jeremiah was asked to test the nation, test Judah, test the systems, test the people, test to see if people weren't complying. And the word test was from the Hebrew word assay. It's the same word to test the purity of silver for a silversmith. And that means heating it up until you actually see the reflection of yourself in the silver that's boiling. And then he mentions later in Lamentations, let us examine our ways and test them. He thought everybody should do this, not just him testing other people. But the same concept goes later with Socrates. He was asked to stop teaching his students. He was a teacher of philosophy. Don't teach people to question authority. Don't teach people to question the way things are. He was one of the original critical thinkers. Critical doesn't mean negative, it means analytical. And he was told, you stop doing this or you're going to pay the price. He says, the greatest good to man is to converse about virtue, and that the life which is unexamined is not worth living. And so he was put to death because he didn't want to live a closed system. You can't talk about problems kind of a life. So am I self-aware? How do you know if you're self-aware? If you say, oh, I'm self-aware, then you're probably not self-aware. If you say, I'm striving to be, and here's how I try to be self-aware. Here's the people in my life, and here's the experiences I learn about. But it's a journey. You're probably more self-aware than other people. And so from time to time, it's really good and uncomfortable as somebody. Am I not seeing something about myself here? You know, but it's worth the pain, right? It's worth the pain. That's conflict confidence. Now, this is you can't read it very well, but all these little circles represent elements in your life you had no control over in your formation. The religion that you were born into, the nation that you were born, the place is the location, the language that you have, your gender that you have, major events that might have been good or traumatic, but they were things that you couldn't do anything about up until your teens. You're just living in this house and complying, and you don't have that much agency. And so your ethnicity would be. And so there's a number of things like that. Songs and movies and TV, TV and all that stuff can influence who we are. Now, that's the formation circle. I also could show a socialization circle. Now, when you're an adult, you can change all these things. You can learn a language, you can get a specific education, you can move to a new nation and choose a vocation that lines up with what you feel called to. You can choose your relationships, you can choose your leader, your mentors. You have a lot of choice. So we are never having an excuse to be stuck because a lot of choices we have as adults. Even if you're poor, you can read something. You can watch something, you can build relationships and be transformed in that process. But who we are in the early stages of our life does kind of stay with us, aspects of it. So it's good to reflect on that. You know, one of the things about people that are from Western civilization, specifically America, we think, we're the greatest nation in the world, and we have this attitude that we're the rescuers, the saviors of the other nations. We stop world wars. And some elements of that is all very true, but some of it is ridiculous because I've been in Europe many times, and then a bunch of Americans start to show up on the street or on an elevator. You go, guys, can you keep it down? And I was in Israel one time and a group said, hey, we're going to go get baptized in the River Jordan today. Well, it was a holy day. We were in a restaurant that the restaurant was closed, but they put food out the day before we could feed ourselves. But all the workers were quiet because it was a holy day. And so, but Americans, I'm not saying all Americans, and I'm not saying the other cultures don't have their own thing too, but we kind of, there's a book called Why the West Hates the Rest, or Why the Rest Hate the West. You have it on your bookshelf, I saw it this morning, and it's because of this entitlement, or exceptionalism and so forth. Not always, and you can break free from that, but it's just good to be self-aware. Okay, so you've been given a handout. And that's for you to, on your own time, test your conflict style. 4 out of 5 times, people know what their conflict style is. So we're going to go with what you think it is for a little conversation right here, okay? So let me explain. If you are goal-oriented during conflict, you're going to win the conflict, then you're competitive. That means you're going to win, the other person's going to lose. If your goal is to preserve the relationship and be willing to lose on the topic, you're going to accommodate. And in my marriage, my wife grew up in a very competitive home and very openly competitive in defiance of authority and that kind of stuff. And I grew up in a very passive home. So I'm the accommodator, Tricia is the computer. That defined very much a good portion of our marriage. It doesn't define it now, but it does define our inclinations. And then if you're a conflict avoider, nobody wins. You for sure don't. Maybe the other person doesn't either. So that can be a real problem, because what happens when we avoid conflict routinely, things build up inside of us. And so then you can collaborate. That's where you're trying to find a win-win. Everybody's going to come out okay from a process of discussion, thinking together, keeping the temperature down. Or sometimes you just compromise. You get some of what you want, I get some of what I want. So let me ask you, what was Jesus? Yeah, the first ones where you just want to win, just compete. He was definitely firm on what was right, but let's just think of him in a situation where it's not necessarily right or wrong. So what was he when? Okay, I would say there's all of these as Jesus. Did he avoid a conflict when he ran out through the crowd that was going to kill him in Capernaum in Luke chapter 4? He was avoiding the conflict. When Herod insulted him remotely through somebody, and he said, "You go tell that fox, I'm going to go to Jerusalem, I'm going to die, and I'm going to come back." That was competitive. He was like, "You're not going to be right on this one here." What about when his mother asked him to make some wine? Remember that moment? Yeah, right. And then maybe when he was talking about paying taxes, maybe that's okay, we don't like it, but that's what we do, He's feeding the 5,000. Maybe that's a collaboration moment. These are not right or wrong. They can be right or wrong. If you're only stuck in one of these, it's going to be wrong sometimes. And it's going to be right sometimes. Now, the idealized is collaboration. But you never want to collaborate with the enemy. There was a king in the Old Testament that did that, Jehoshaphat. He collaborated with Ahab. Ahab's wife was Jezebel. Nobody's never named their kid Jezebel, right? She was evil. She was awful. And so he got really close to them, buddy-buddy. They had intermarriage with their kids. And the prophet comes along later and says, should you love the people the Lord hates? And he got corrected, So the collaboration most of the time is really helpful, especially when there's the church is trying to figure out what to do next, solve problems and so forth. Okay. So take the test on your own maybe with your spouse or your roommate and see if you know who you are. Actually, let's back up for a second. Who here knows they're competitive? Okay. Got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, great. Who thinks that they're an avoider? Okay. 3, 4, 5. Okay. 6. Okay. How about you tend to accommodate and lose what you want, but keep the relationship? Okay. I think you could actually, some people will say, I'm an avoider and an unaccommodator. Because I saw hands raised twice, right? Who has learned the art of compromise, like with your spouse, and they've learned it really well too? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, that's probably the most. That's about 10. And then who says, I'm a collaborator? Okay. 4. Okay. Those 5. That's a really helpful thing in the church world because, especially our history, we came from a top-down world. And decisions were made by a few, and then we kind of had to work with it and so forth. But better decisions are made when there's a lot more perspectives brought in by gifted people, experienced people that have the ability to bring more information to the table and a better outcome. So that's what I say. Okay. Some of you probably known this and maybe even could articulate it better than me, but our brainstem is very interesting. Our amygdala, about the size of almonds, about right here in our brain, control our safety responses when we're under threat or risk. And, we see a snake, we're going to choose a response that's going to make us safe, right? Usually back up real quick or something like that. And then our hippocampus it's about our emotional, romantic side of our brain and sensations and feeling. Prefrontal cortex is where our logic comes from. See nuance, we can reason, we can be creative. But what's interesting is when we feel threatened, like in a conflict, the amygdala, which is about 15% of our brain, can hijack the rest of our brain and cause us to respond in ways that are detrimental to us and the relationship. And so we want to learn when that is happening. So if you're driving a car and somebody swerves into your lane, you're going to do one of two things. You're either going to go to the lane to the right or you're gonna make sure that lane's clear and then move to the right, you know? And so you could either have another kind of an accident, or you could be completely safe, but you have these alertness that the amygdala contributes to. Now, if we have been suffering all sorts of threats and risk and abuse and trauma, that part of our brain can be very damaged. And through therapy and learning and rehearsing how we should have handled things in the past or the present, we can see our amygdala heal. So now, am I self-aware? And that means engaging respectfully. A lot of people just associate this with active listening, which is very important. This is where you are making sure you're taking time to understand before you're trying to be understood. And you have a demeanor in your body that shows relaxedness. You're not like this, but you're conveying, I'm hearing. You're shaking your head. You may ask a couple questions like, hey, can you elaborate on that? That's active listening. And I'm interested in hearing more. That's active listening. And then when we speak, our tone is really important. And some of our conflicts, our worst conflicts in society are related to identity. Because identity you can't change. You are who you are. And if who you are and your people and your group are threatened, you take it as an affront in a very serious way. And that causes us to be illogical at times. So if you're in a conflict with somebody and you're aware that their identity may be a component of it, be really alert, because that can affect how you will respond. So are you engaging respectfully, and so forth. So, and then even after a conflict is resolved, you can ask, how did I do? I set up a meeting about 2.5 years ago with an elder and evangelist in a church, and the evangelist had said something really horrific about me that wasn't true. And I met with him and I just said, I want to hear your perspective. It was like, no, I didn't mean it like that. I didn't hear it like that. Well, he had done it enough times that I thought, yeah, there's something here, but I'm not going to be an accuser. I just wanted to show I'm present, I'm here, and I want to hear where this is coming from and know that's not true. He stopped. And the elder in the meeting said later, yeah, I thought Staten was going to come for the kill, you know. I was really impressed. I want that reputation, you know, that I'm calm, want an important dialogue. I think the dialogue was enough to stop the gossip that was going on. Just show presence. I'm willing to engage. I'm not going to hide and run away. I'm going to call you up and say, let's get a cup of coffee. And when people know that you're like that, and you're not afraid to have a difficult conversation, they're going to be less likely to want to get into conflict, you know. So now this is the last and most important thing I want to convey here on conflict competence. There's a phrase that came about in the 70s. Different people have been given credit for it, but it's called go to the balcony. Like, see yourself from outside of yourself. Look at the dance moves. Look at your conflict moves. How do you come across? Imagine you're watching you. How would an older you down the road look at the you now and how you're behaving? And so it's a phrase that has turned to help out a lot of people to calm themselves down. When somebody's arms are flailing around in a conflict, that doesn't look good. And so it may be a reminder, hey, be calm, have composure, be careful what you say and how you come across. Now, has there anything you've heard here today new or that you wish you had incorporated in a past or present conflict? Is there anything that would have been helpful if you had been exposed to this material earlier? I will ask that question again as we lay some more blocks down. You know, but this is basic. This is a very foundational piece. Okay, so in a community, there are certain individuals who, in the process of resolving inner conflicts, they become the paradigms for the broader group. So what that means is, let's say you're in a church of 80 people, and it's got a lot of unresolved conflicts. And maybe you are part of those. How you do it can set the tone, how you engage, how you listen, how you set up important conversations. And in my work, I'll ask the question, who do you feel is the person most trusted in your ministry that can handle high pressure things that, and you usually is somebody that's really good managing their own conflicts. And identifying those people are helpful. First of all, some of them be great candidates to be elders, but they're also great problem solvers because they're not reactive. So we can become a paradigm for our community. So, okay, so what time is it here? I'm going to move into the next one. We'll take a break after we do apologies. Okay, this is going to be apologies. And here's a little video.
Apologise for your meeting last night against right honourable friends on this side.
I didn't make that in my opening remarks. I respect people who disagree.
It would be helpful if he could retract his inappropriate comments from last
I
night.
completely agree with the honourable gentleman. Everyone in this house should make up their mind on the arguments in this house.
I cannot identify a single terrorist sympathiser among that. Will he now apologise for his deeply insulting remarks?
I made very clear, this is about how we fight terrorism. Neither is honour in any vote that honourable members make.
I do think, however, that he needs to apologise for the comments he made in relation to the Labour Party.
The honourable gentleman raises a very important point.
Should he not take this opportunity to withdraw the remarks that he is calling those who will not be voting with him tonight a bunch of terrorist sympathisers? Because not only is that offensive, it is dangerous and it is untrue.
I've made my views clear about the importance of all of us fighting terrorism, and I think it's time to move on.
Will he take this further opportunity to identify which members of these benches he regards as terrorist sympathisers?
Yeah. Everyone in this house can speak for themselves.
Well, the Prime Minister, he's been asked before, but he must apologise for the smut that was put on every member of the opposition last night. What?
He had 13 opportunities and he never apologized. And so, Prime Minister Cameron, it was an intervention measure with the terrorists in alignment with the US. And he had, obviously you can tell, he slammed anybody that didn't want to line up to go after the terrorist with a particular strategy. But he got his way, which is unfortunate because as a bulldog, he didn't learn his lesson. You don't, alienate your opposition like that, but that's the story there. So, okay, we're talking about understanding the arts of negotiating a policy. It's an art, not a science. Science is like very formulaic. It's empirical. You know what the outcome is going to be if you do things a certain way. You don't know with humans. Even if you have a perfect apology when one is merited. And I want, early on here, I want to redefine the word apology. Okay, the concept goes back about 600 BC. The word would be used by Socrates and Plato. Then in the Christian world, it takes on a new meaning again. Then there's an evolution through the Reformation and Renaissance with Shakespeare. And then there's more changes in modern society when governments are clearly wrong, like the Vietnam War. And then a lot of stuff that's going on today. I'm going to give you some examples. But the word apologos is a story or speech, and apologia or apologia, depending on, nobody knows for sure which is the right pronunciation. It's a written or oral defense story. Okay. So it didn't start out as I'm so bad, my bad, I'm sorry, here's my mea culpa. It meant nothing like that, quite the opposite. But the one thing that it did have that makes sense is providing an answer to an accusation. So in time it evolved. It became associated with regret real late in history. But we're going to look at it on a continuum. So it began as a defense or vindication. Then with Paul and Peter, it's about giving an explanation for your faith. Those who don't understand, it's to the pagans, basically. I'd be willing to give an example. I think it's in 1 Peter and in Colossians, the word is used. And the NIV uses the word explanation. Then in the 1590s, it became sorrow, an answer that contains sorrow or regret. But only was used just once in that period. And then over the centuries, it started to be used some more. And then in the 1960s, during the turbulence of so many unjust things that were going on in society, you find governing officials starting to say, we're sorry, we were wrong, and let me please apologize, so forth. So I think it can be all the above and maybe a combination depending on the situation. So we're going to consider some very iconic examples across many sectors: family, politics, sports, business, and whatever. And I'll go kind of fast. I'm not going to read them all because the slides will be available, but let's take a look. Marion Jones took drugs, performance-enhancing drugs, which were illegal. And when she got caught later, she says, I'm deeply sorry. Sorry is not enough. I want to ask for your forgiveness. I've asked my God for forgiveness. I promise these events will use to make the lives of many people improve. And she has. She stayed very active in the sports industry and be part of recommending guidelines and cautioning young women in her field not to do what she did. And so that's a really good an apology. Yeah, this is American Idol apologized for Tyler's behavior. Tyler didn't apologize. He was vulgar. He was mean. He was cursing up a storm on the show. They apologized, said it'll never happen again, but it did. So they had to let him go, and so forth. So Schwarzenegger apologizing for an affair that he had with the family's nanny that produced a child, and it led to a divorce. And you know, I deserve the feelings and anger and disappointment among my friends and family. My family doesn't. My wife doesn't. You know, no excuses. I take responsibility. Asking me to respect my wife and children. I deserve the attention and criticism. That's considered a good apology. Rodman got involved in weighing in on events with North Korea and the U.S. And he stepped outside of his mind. He was drinking a lot of alcohol. I want to apologize. I take full responsibility. I should know better to make political statements. Truly sorry. Consider it a good apology. The president of Microsoft, he's still the president. He actually made a comment that people should stop complaining about rising up the ranks, especially women. He says, it'll eventually work out for you. That's what I learned growing up. That did not float. Very severe criticism. And he said it was generic advice that was just wrong. I used that advice, but that doesn't mean it was good advice. And my advice underestimated exclusion and bias that can hold people back. So that actually was accepted, and he's still high-ranking at Microsoft. Trump, in 2015, told Jimmy Fallon, I fully think apologizing is a great thing, but you have to be wrong. And of course, Fallon said, this is unbelievable. Kathy Griffin, she held a mock-up head of Trump, decapitated in 2017. She was over the top. She apologized. I'm a comic. I crossed the line. I moved the line, and I crossed it, and went way too far. This image is disturbing. Then a few months later, she said, I am no longer sorry. The whole outrage was blank, you know. And her career has tanked. Big time. Financially and opportunities. So apologies can be really important, right? Boris Johnson, it was too late for him because he had all these COVID restrictions for everybody in the UK except for him. He had these parties, a lot of people in close quarters drinking, not wearing masks. And he basically says, I was mistaken. I apologize for it unreservedly. It did not help him keep his job, but at least he owned up and said he was hypocritical in that. No, a bad apologist says, if I hurt anyone, that's leaving room that I might not hurt him. So take the if out of any apology, right? Never use the word mistakes. I've seen church leaders use, I made some mistakes. Now people were harmed, but they were mistakes. It's like tripping, you know. I tripped over the cord, so that was a mistake. Oh, I forgot to say something. That's a mistake. No, but when you abuse somebody, when you were involved in a scandal or a cover-up or something, that's not a mistake. That's a sin. That's malfeasance. I apologize. That's when people say that, the hearers are waiting for the apology. That's just saying I'm wrong, but you're wrong about what? Give us some detail. Or I'm sorry. What are you sorry for? Are you sorry you got caught? Are you sorry you did something, you know? I'm sorry. You know, that would be what a kid would do, not one of these spanks, you know what I'm saying? And so, these are kinds of things, that people do. So, it's just really helpful to know how, well, our words, how they come across can be heard. So now we're going to talk about how to complicate matters, because when we are in conflict, they can escalate. So we're going to talk about the before, and then you're in a conflict and you're hurt. And then you're confused. And then you're alarmed, you're shocked, what's happened? And it keeps going on and you're in tears. Then you might get angry. Nothing's changed. It's just how you're feeling as time goes on. And whatever has happened to get to these moods, there's a really good chance that a conversation is going to help, a facilitated conversation like a mediation or an apology is going to help. But it gets worse. Now, I'm not going to take it anymore, you know? And so you're just steaming mad, you get in a fight, you know? And it's just about all over and you're done forever. Closed off any hope of a relationship. It's all over. There's nothing you can say that will ever change how I feel. Okay. So with this little animation, what do you think would be a lesson to de-escalate that thing? Let it get too far. Don't let it get too far, right? I was leading a ministry, 2005. My wife and I were asked to go in the city. It was so divided, the staff was divided. They couldn't have staff meetings. There were feudal groups in the ministry that they would sit on different sides of the auditorium, and it was just really terrible. And we counted all the unresolved conflicts. It took about a year to know how many there were. There were about 20. There were actually 23 that we found. And so what we did was I just had to get back up from all the elders and evangelists because I knew this could potentially be bloody. It could be potentially be a great thing. Is I'm going to ask everybody to affirm a covenant of Matthew 5 and Matthew 18. That means if I feel something negative about somebody, I'll go to them. If they feel something negative about me, I'll go to them. And they have the same dual responsibility. And from this point forward, we weren't going to hold people hostage to what happened beforehand. But from this point forward, we'll do that. So with about 400 members, we lost 70 and did not want to do that. What was interesting, our attendance didn't go down, our contribution didn't go down, and the 23 came down to 3. So that was like, wow, this is peaceful. And we told the 70, say, we still view you as an extended family. We're not saying you're lost. We're not calling you always. We hope you'll come back, but we want to live by covenant in this community. And I did a lot of Bible teaching to get prepared for that. 25 eventually came back. But what was interesting, we had the 3 left. So we formed a group of 9 people that had HR background, business background. Some had been involved in negotiation, mediation. So the people in the unresolved conflicts could agree upon 3 people of the 9. And then that would be the mediation team. I was not on any of the mediation teams because I wanted them not to have a power differential in the room like Steve was closer to that one person. No. But all 3 of the conflicts went away. And then the next probably 12 years, that group only had to be used 1 more time. Why? Because we sent a signal that we are going to go by the Bible and we've got a mechanism and it's safe, but we're not just going to ignore things when they happen again. And then we move. So I don't know what it's like since we moved, but that's really important to have really good commitment. And so when I eventually got my degree in conflict management, I look back at what I did 2006, 7 was by the book, our book, the Bible, you know. So, okay, the power of a good apology. It sheds new light, provides ownership, fault. It can reverse damage, certainly emotional damage. It can provide healing words, convey future reassurance. We're going to be together. We're going to get through all this. It can transform your thinking. Does anybody here have an illustration of having either given an apology that had a great impact or having received an apology that had an impact on you that you feel comfortable sharing? Yes.
Someone that, I'm gonna say I wasn't the one that caused the conflict, but it came to me. And so to save our relationship, I apologize. But after I apologized, this person didn't apologize back. And I was like, really good, she should have apologized back, but she didn't. So how should I have taken that?
Well, at least on your side, you have a clear conscience. There should be some peace that, okay, insofar as it's up to me. There are multiple reasons why somebody didn't apologize. Obviously, one is they don't think they did anything wrong, but they may not remember something. Or they may misremember, or they're not mentally or emotionally well. They're afraid of the whole process. I remember one time someone on staff blurted out in an angry way at our evangelist in Chicago. And she completely had forgotten about it. And then one day, some of the elders, I had stepped out of the eldership by then. Some of the elders said, let's go back and talk about what happened, because this was during 2003, the crisis in our churches. And they said, and the elders said, let's make sure we clean up what happened in the past, any relationship stuff. This sister who did this, blurting out for me, completely forgot about it. Then in the meeting, it came back to her. And she apologized profusely. It was one of the best apologies, because she said, for 2 years, I forgot I did that. And so sometimes it could be a memory issue. Now, what can you do now going forward? That would probably be a longer conversation. It'd be more depending on what had happened and what we know about this. First, a good question. Anybody here see? Yeah.
Well, it's just reminding me of something that in the previous section, when you talked about having self-reflection and knowing how you're coming across, I think that was something last week. I had a little conflict with someone, and I was with my family. So family is so unique. I was with siblings and spouses. So in that moment, I'm feeling like, oh, we're resolving this. This is going on. And I'm looking at this and realizing, I think I need to ask someone else, what do you think? Because maybe I have more, I'm not as compromising or as thoughtful or as kind as I think I am.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of presenting myself incorrectly. And I can see that as something where, somebody doesn't even see their own.
So for the sake of the recording, not hearing you, you had a family matter where you did have these meaningful conversations. You did go to places to talk about things, but you're actually thinking now, looking back in light of this material, maybe I didn't go as far as I could. Yeah. Very good. Yes.
Yeah, it's funny, the cycle that you talk about with my dad and I, we had some interaction that was very hurtful. And I had challenged him on that. And all I asked of him was an apology.
Yeah.
And he refused to apologize. And so I went through the entire cycle where I just felt like I can't have a relationship with somebody who won't take any responsibility and apologize.
Yeah.
And during the course of that time, I had reached out to my aunt and sister, and I'd shared that with them, and they're both spiritual people, they both believe in God. And so she was able to convey that in a way that I was not able to convey, and we hadn't spoken in over 12 years.
Wow.
And I believe God, working through my aunt, was able to share with my dad what he had done. And one day out of the blue, he called me and he apologized.
Wow.
And we've restored our relationship over the last 2 or 3 years. And so I think even having that last step, there's still hope. Yeah,
that's awesome. That's great. The idea of having a breach with this major family member, like a parent, and for the sake of those who are listening, then making a decision to pull back till that responsibility is accepted by the party that won't apologize. But then the breakthrough happened because another person stepped in, and that often happens to be the case. And there's the soft step in, and that's what that was. Not an official intervention and tell people what you need to do, and what, taking a side or whatever. But hey, let me tell you what it could look like what you did, and it moved the needle and then led to a breakthrough and a recovery. Yeah, so very good, very good. Okay, let's go next. Now, forming an apology. If you are innocent, you're going to want to give a defense, right? If you're culpable, you want to go, here's my mea culpa. Well, let me define the words up there. Defense is your explanation, your story. An explanation might not be a defense necessarily. It could be just either some context you may not know. Sympathy, I'm sorry that this happened, but I'm not quite ready to say I did anything wrong, but I'm super sorry that something happened in our relationship. Social harmony is an expression, it's definitely big in Asia, where somebody will say, I'm sorry. It doesn't mean anything about regret. It means, I'm sorry you're in pain. And the Japanese culture is very prominent with this. This shows up in even business agreements between the West and Japan. And then a mea culpa is, I'm bad, my bad, I was wrong, and so forth. So it's like, if you want to clear yourself all charges, you're just going to stick to the defense. If that's your only answer, you're sticking to the defense. So let's say it's the explanation. I want you to know where this situation come from. Here's some information you did not know. And I'm sorry that you went through such an ordeal. And I don't regret that you're hurt. I know you're hurt. And just get to the other side of this. And then, of course, my actions were inexcusable. And some of those great apologies, I showed you more good ones than bad ones, because there's some good language in there that we could use for our own apologies, because you can see from the impact of the words, whether it's in society or whatever. So now, what if your answer with the party you're conflicted with, they deserve a regret, but they still so misrepresented what had happened. And there's an element of defense, an explanation that's needed. Maybe there's an element of like 3 or 4 of these things that should be part of your delivery. What do you start with? I'll just tell you, in my marriage, if I start with defense, it's not going to go well. You start with the place that's going to warm the other person that you're hearing, that you're listening. And you could say, there's more to this we'd like to really talk through, but for sure, when I said this, it was harmful, it was inexcusable, it was not right, and I'm sorry for the harm that it caused. And I wouldn't even say, please forgive me yet. Let it sit there, because that's putting a burden on them. Let them just marinate in it a bit. And then you can ask and plead for forgiveness. And then when that's all better, say, honey, I want you to know what some pieces that you may not know. And most likely that other person is going to be very receptive after you've cleared the air from the wrongdoing. That makes sense? So again, there are some bad apologies. My bad is not even that great. It can be too brief. We already talked about I'm sorry. We had a fight in the first year of our marriage, and I said, I stand corrected. And Tricia said, what does that mean? I grew up hearing I stand corrected all the time when somebody was wrong. And it really meant I am on the wrong side of this. And then one time we're watching a 1950s movie with Jimmy Stewart. He's wrong about something. He says, I stand corrected. I said, Tricia, see. But it's better to not just have oversimplification, but to elaborate so they know what you mean. I was mistaken, not helpful. In the UK, they say I wasn't helpful. When I heard that, I thought, what do you mean? But it is a statement of humility. It's just in their culture. To them, it means something that wouldn't mean something to us. I've seen politicians in the UK do it. It was like, wow, I was out of line. That's good, but elaborate, what does that mean? In negotiating, sometimes both sides are wrong, right? You have to kind of go back and forth. So let's talk about the giver. Looking at the apology giver. What was their stance? Does it have integrity? Does it lead to justice and fairness? If culpable, are they taking responsibility? If innocent, do they demonstrate concern? What lead to healing? By the way, and is it a game changer? You probably will recognize this phrase, Siskel and Eberting. Okay, Siskel and Ebert were famous movie critics back in the 80s and 90s, maybe even as far back as the 70s. They both have since passed away, but there would be thumbs up, thumbs down, one thumb up, one thumb down on movie reviews. And I would put the thumbs actually part of the whole half-hour show on the movies that have been out that week, And so that's what sometimes people do when an apology is given. Even in like a mega church apology, a pastor scandal or whatever, and quickly you'll go online and people go thumbs up, thumbs down. And they're definitely evaluating, like, they're the perfect understander of apologies. That wasn't good enough. They don't get it, whatever. Well, sometimes that's the case, but we should have humility when we're receiving a less than perfect apology. Okay. So the receiver, is she overparsing or he overparsing? They want too much. Can they at least acknowledge there's been progress, And does the receiver at least owe some sort of response in the form of an apology? So these are just things to think about, just to be aware of. Now, as you would consider a pastor-person conflict, and I did actually ask that a little bit earlier in this session, but is there anything you heard today that you wish you had in your arsenal in a previous conflict? Yes.
It's something I be more considerate to just say I'm sorry. Right, to make sure that I'm all with what I'm sorry for.
Right.
Rather
I mean, just that takeaway can make it all worth the Saturday morning workshop. That I'm going to follow through with the specifics of what I'm sorry for. Because that sometimes people are left hanging, but they don't feel confident enough to ask what you're sorry for. So to deliver that in the next, apology. Anything else? Yes.
I think when we talk meeting, the idea that to the when an apology that softens
Yeah.
the situation makes it clear the embracing how you match by the way.
Yeah. You're right. If things are complicated and there's a nuanced apology, start with the humble piece that warms up them to hear you for any of the stuff that will come later, which is the regret and that kind of stuff. Thank you. That's very good. Okay, so let's take a break and we'll come back in 5 or so minutes. I'll try to keep us on time. Thank you.
No. Yes, no, absolutely not.
I like it. I don't know my husband. Just been on all. He's a.
Can fast forward.
Of our parents, but I pretty hard. That's like, well. And you got Madison. It's funny, he says we learned early on that we fight. Yeah. Yeah, he always insisted, even though I was like, really sorry, ready to resolve something. That's how my family is, And then.
Okay, thanks, appreciate it.
Was
like that we're talking, they don't remember what they're fighting about. And, you know, and they want to keep problems, you know, it's not just women living in that, it's like they want the apology. So we learned to meet with this. Whereas like when we were dating, you know, back then, beefing his disciples. You know, putting my number on his pager and his disciple would call him, but yeah, that girlfriend's, you know, and yeah, so it's I think the first our marriage was down and
Well, and
we were able to resolve something within a day. I was like, it's like God. Because, you know, I mean, it's so, and I was so self-righteous.
So eventually it's more.
Well, we're both, my parents are from Chinese. And they both. Yes. Yeah, yeah, so yeah, definitely in that Filipino culture, I learned that very early on. I didn't really understand that well, but with his mother. Yeah, a day and a half. We were literally in the middle of the night. I was trying to find my husband because he was staying with roommates, but his roommates had moved to a different apartment with the complex, and I didn't know where it was. I'm just like driving around the complex, the people are up against me and anyway, but yeah. We ended up, he was just much fun, her, she was, I was disrespected, so I couldn't leave, I'm just like, hey, who's this wedding about? But anyway, I just told myself, you know what, and it made me something ingrained. If she heard of the mother, the time I was little, she was just like, you know, being cheese were one of 7 blossoms, you know, that I was one of the children. And she was my favorite daughter. And yeah, that's my husband's son. But yeah, so he, so I just told myself, so, I mean, at that time, his brother was a tiger. And obviously, and then both was. I said, you know what? Put her out, let her, you know, and I said, well, he said, yeah, you know, they were just. And I just feel like.
No, don't do that. Don't do that.
This hanging over my head, like I was. So we switched the sun on my head. Her voice off the spirit. And then we. In the end, it was really not a father and mother separated at the time. My parents had been separated for us. But my dad, but John's father, I was really more about that. And her, it's about, you know, I really think that's so, you know, she's that.
I have to sit down.
For it.
Like this.
Don't sit down, but anyway, neither here nor there, so it's good, you know. Do you have like?
Oh, no.
pictures or-
Somebody.
Okay.
Just to say,
Yeah. Full tilt.
Well,
12 till 11. 10:48, we go until 11.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, there's one back here and then there's a men's one. If you go through the store, the men's one is down on the right. Okay, like go straight and then to the left. Okay.
Oh, yes. What are you gonna do? Oh. No.
Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started.
Right? But that's my symphony.
Can we grab our seats? We're gonna begin talking about forgiveness. So everything about our conflict competence, seeing ourselves from the balcony, being self-aware, having a really well worded and heartfelt apology that's not the end game. The end game is either forgiveness or forgiveness and reconciliation, and they are not the same. Most people know that, but I will clarify on that. So we're talking about first about forgiveness on the idea of preserving crucial relationships. And sometimes forgiveness occurs, but you can't preserve the relationship because so much damage has been done, or people have just moved because of the conflict so far away from each other. It's harder to get that repair in place. It also depends on the nature of the offense, if it's recoverable or not, right? So we're talking about engaging the heart and the mind. I'm going to give you some iconic stories, just probably 3, of where we see the full road of forgiveness and reconciliation. The first one will be between a tormentor and a prison. Japanese tormentor, Takeshi of Eric Lomax. We're going to talk about only reference really the Mandela and de Klerk thing, and then one in a corporate world of Apple versus Google. There was a thing that happened that I find very interesting because I have an engineering and tech background, so that's why I put it in here. But so here's the story. Eric Lomax was a prisoner of war, but he also, as a soldier, his job was engineering in radio. And as a captured soldier, he managed to sneak in a radio to the prison. And I think this is in Thailand. It's connected to the famous movie, The Bridge Over River Thai. But they were given menial work, construction work as prisoners captured by the Japanese. And Eric Lomax was kind of always looking for a way out, always looking for a way to communicate with the Allies. Because of that, he got an extra dose of torment, and a lot of it was his hands would get pulverized by a particular soldier named Takeshi. Now, he eventually, his first marriage, Eric Lomax's marriage, was horrible because of how he had PTSD and trauma. And it really messed up his marriage, messed up his relationship even with his adult kids. And his second marriage, the wife was like, we got to get a handle on this. So she did some research and found out that his tormentor had wrote a book. And the book had a lot of regret. And she made an attempt to get them connected. So this became the basis for a movie with Colin Firth, and I think it was Julianne Moore. I can't remember. No, it was somebody else. But anyway, so it was a very good movie that tells this story. However, I have a clip of the two of them meeting. I think this is their second time that they've met. But Takeshi felt so awful that he ended up creating a place for people to visit. That's what he did for a living, place for people to visit to tell what happened during the war. He did it out of his own guilt and remorse. And so this is where the site that this little section takes place. It'll be hard to hear, but you'll definitely be able to sense the emotions.
May I touch your hand?
Oh, yes.
No, I mean, when you are tortured, being tortured, I measured your pulse.
Yes,
And then
yes.
your heartbeat is very smooth. So I am very
Well,
much relaxed.
there is where the broken road are.
Yes, I remember.
Yes.
Very sorry. Very sorry for you.
Well, we both survived.
As a member of the Japanese army, we treated your country very, very badly and against the humanity. I realized that. So when I repatriated from here to country, and I got various sufferings in my heart and mind. But I tried. And whenever I think of you, why you are born in this world? What purpose?
Yes.
For what purpose?
It's a difficult question to answer.
I'm very, very sorry.
Well, thank you very much.
I think I can die safely.
You didn't even need to hear the words, right? Just so moving. So there's an iconic story, is kind of well known. Of course, we know this one was really, really big in the 90s. We especially need to forgive each other, because when you intend to forgive, you heal part of the pain, but when you forgive, you heal completely. And Mandela, there was a lot for him to forgive. I think it was 27 years he was in prison. But he came out with a gregarious spirit and became part of the solution in a very troubled part of the world. It's still troubled, but is better because this man lived. So Steve Jobs and Eric Schmidt, okay? Eric Schmidt was on the board of Apple. And this would be in the early 2000s, as they're planning the first iPhone, which came out in 2007. Schmidt was hearing insider trade secrets. He was getting a chance to try out the device and see it develop before any of us even knew that it was in existence. And then he is developing the Android phones, which came out so shortly after this. They could have only come out as fast as they did because they were able to take advantage of Apple's head start. And Schmidt and Jobs were friends up to this point. This was a breach that lasted for a long time. And they eventually sat down to talk, and somebody just so happened to get the first time that they met to talk here in 2010, and they reconciled over coffee. So this skill set that we're talking about and this disposition transcends church, family, business, society, and so forth. So defining forgiveness, it means to give completely without reservation. And it's releasing feelings. Now, I'm going to talk about 4 different kinds of motivations for forgiveness here. Robert Enright, he's actually had an influence spoken in some of our churches. He said, to forgive is to know that you've been treated unjustly, and despite the injustice, make the decision to reduce your resentment towards the offending person and eventually work towards mercy. The mercy can take the form of kindness, respect, generosity, even love. Do you want these in your life? Forgiveness can help strengthen them in your heart or even help them grow again for you. Now, the 4 kinds, we'll go through these briefly because they're pretty easy to understand. I want to forgive because of me, therapeutic, because of the relationship, us, because of society, that like it'd just be better for everybody, or transformative and redemptive, an unexpected benefit of the fact that you even had a problem in the first place. So the therapeutic model is a choice to free yourself, the victim, of the anger and stop blaming the perpetrator for your present happiness or unhappiness, right? It is not condoning bad behavior or overlooking repercussions. And it's not reconciliation. Certain boundaries are still in place. You want to replace the victim story with the hero story. And the goal is the victim's well-being, not the perpetrator's well-being. It's getting yourself out of the toxins of the bitterness. Now, Eva Mo's core and her twin sister on the front there, it's not a real clear picture, but I forget the perpetrator's name, a famous doctor, Mengele, was experimenting on twins, doing something on one twin and something else on another, and just using humans as guinea pigs for his experiments. And both of them were experimented on. And Eva's twin sister died in the late 1960s as a result of the implications of the experiments back in the 1940s. So she lost her sister. She went on to live. She eventually set up a Holocaust museum in Fort Wayne, Indiana, died a few years ago. But her story is really interesting. She decided to produce a documentary, or somebody produced a documentary with her showing up all throughout it. It was called Forgiving Dr. Mengele. And it upset a lot of people because people interpreted forgiving as saying, we're okay now, you know. And she was saying, I didn't do this for him, I did this for me. And naturally, you can understand why a title like that, or even a position like that, could cause confusion or hurt or pain. But she stayed with it. She stayed on now. And then she met the prison guard who was still alive and shows up in the documentary. And it so happened that he did the best he could under limited circumstances to look out for these kids. But he was still part of a Nazi evil system. So he owed her an apology, but she forgave him anyway. And so that's an example of a therapeutic, for me, apology. It's not about the perpetrator, whether they're alive or dead or whatever. The relationship for us is the victim faces the traumatic events, what they were, forgives the slings and arrows of the wrongdoer, and if necessary, forgives self and many others. It's not an attempt to back up the clock, as if nothing changed. Overall goal is restoring the relationship. And a lot of time when this happens, you don't have to go through all the tit for tat and everything that happened. That's not forgiveness, actually. Well, you gotta own every single thing you said and everything you did, and I want to make sure it matches my memory. Memories are so extremely unreliable. And so I think that's just not forgiveness. But you want something that shows us real forgiveness and that there's repentance, and so that you can move towards reconciliation, that we can feel safe again. But so this is a two-party system here for us. The next one for society is unique. The self-aware victim sees the enemy is broken. He or she is empathetic. I did not walk in their shoes. The forgiver works towards societal redemption and improvements to avoid repeated offense. I have repents. He has repented. He's suffered enough. The overall goal is enrichment for society, modeling, and improving society. An example of this would be in many of the wars and parts of Africa where tribes killed each other. They were neighbors. You're part of one religious tribe and I'm part of another. And all of a sudden, at the end of this war, the husband is dead. And the murderer is your neighbor. And so with a lot of facilitation, a lot of mediators, I think many of them came out of Harvard, because that's the leading place where this field has really burgeoned over the last 60 years. But they got down there and helped people realize they're not going to make it unless they figure out, let's look at this societally, because we've got to share pasture, we've got to share cows. We're going to have to help each other and overcome the original tribal thing that we are fellow humans. And obviously we can't go back and resuscitate the dead. That's just a hard one for me to imagine being in that situation. But it's real, and it does make sense following the logic of it. So the transformative model, you guys know this one really well because it's very clear in the Bible, especially with the story of Joseph and his brothers. And it showed, we'll talk about this again on the reconciliation piece, but it's illustrated there, and it's redemptive. A surprising gift came of improved circumstances because of the evil. And there was a sovereignty of God in it all along. There was a plan for it, and you're able to see it in hindsight. There's new opportunities for deeper understanding, some concept, like that. I actually have seen this happen a few times in ministry. I've seen fierce enemies We can't even be in the same staff together, same church staff together. But able to quote unquote bury the hatchet. And then once again, go on family vacations together like they used to and so forth. And so, and I love when the church actually just mimics the Bible in a heartfelt way. Like we have our stories of redemption and reconciliation. I'll tell you a little story about me where I needed forgiveness. My wife had studied the Bible with a very attractive young girl, and she was probably unaware of how sensual she was. A lot of guys liked her. She was being pursued by a lot of young men. And but one of the men she accepted in courtship, and they were dating. Then one day she broke off the relationship without any explanation. He wanted an explanation, and she would not talk to him. And then she presented him to me as a stalker. Okay, so I took her side. No mediation, no talk with this guy. I just believed her. And this guy was so hurt that he left the church. But after he left, she was doing this kind of stuff with other guys. We became apparent she's the problem, you know, and she's messing up guys and she's dressing in inappropriate ways. And her life ended up turning out to be a real wreck. But I tried to track down this guy's name was Chris. I just could not find him. And then I heard that he had attended our church service. This is somewhere around 2000-ish or whatever. I was an elder at the time, actually, at this time. He had visited me. Somebody gave me his contact information, he would not reply. So I'm like, what do I do here? What do I do? Then I knew he was going to attend a midweek somewhere far away from where I normally went. So I got in the car and went there. And fortunate for me, he was in the back corner of a room and there was only one exit where I was coming in. And he just looked at me like he saw a ghost, you know. So I went up to him and said, Chris, I was dead wrong. We were not stalking whoever he was. And I should have listened to your side of the story. I am just so sorry. I was so wrong. I don't know what to do, but I missed you because I remember some of the good talks we used to have back in the day. I could see his countenance just left. He said, well, I really wanted to talk to you. And it was about things like theology. It was a teacher kind of a person. He wanted to have conversations, but he wasn't sure where I was coming from. You know, he felt under judgment. And so it was fantastic reconciliation. It was pretty good. Another time, somebody came to church who I had disfellowshipped for major adultery. I can't remember if this was one where he split up a marriage, because I had a couple back to back as a young elder. So about 4 years later, this person who's not supposed to be at church comes to church, and I forget the whole reason he's not at church. And I look at him, memory might have blanked out. I said, Danny, it's so great to see you. And he was shocked. I could see he was shocked. And then when I saw his shock, I remembered. I could not pull this back in. I could not reel this back. And he's so softened, and he came back to church and became a member again and so forth. But my accidental mercy made a difference, you know, and so forth. So this kind of a topic is really important for us to see the value of it. So let's talk about appraising. Sometimes we wish well, sometimes we wish harm, but you know what? There's even a biblical precedent where God sometimes wishes harm, wishes well, right? There is a breach in a relationship. It's not, we shouldn't put judgment on the first response. The Lord wanted to kill Aaron after the Exodus incident, or Exodus 32 with the golden calf, right then and there. But he didn't. Do we want to waive reparations, or we want to expect them? You know, to make this thing right, to do something to fix it. Is there hope for a future relationship or not? You can forgive somebody and not want a relationship with them. And a good example is if they have predatory behavior. You don't feel safe. And we can't even take a risk on it, you know, that sort of thing. So you can put it on a continuum. It just kind of, when you're thinking about something, how am I feeling? Why am I feeling that? Without the judgment on, am I bad because I'm feeling in a certain way? Just recognize, hey, this is where I'm at right now. Let me figure out why I'm there. and what I can do to be to the place that I want to be. Because I may want something better than what I'm currently feeling. And so it's just good to be self-valued. Now, let's define reconciliation. It means to bring together again, regain, win over, conciliate. In the Greek, it means to change from enmity to friendship, to change one's feelings toward. And to basically working definition, to bring together again in a friendly standing for an improved future. Now, like apologies, I had to continue. You're also going to have this with reconciliation and different kinds of reconciliation. The weakest one is open-ended. Agree to disagree, mutually affirm some of the lessons learned, be willing to establish ground rules for a cordial relationship. That means you can actually be in the same room. Maybe even be in the same meeting where decisions are made. You're not going to hang out for a coffee beforehand or after necessarily, but you may get there, but you don't have to rehash everything. You accept that person as your sister or your brother, that you believe they're going to heaven, and we're just at the starting. So the next one is more transient. The issue is a result, but the consequences have been so life-altering that rebuilding the trust and healing may take more time. You know what? Sometimes people move different cities. There's just no way to recapture what it was. You can't dial back. You can't sell your house and move back to the original city and just say, let's get back on the same staff again. You can't. But you can open the door for progress. And so you're not going to be embarrassed when you see each other at a conference. You can get on the phone, check on each other's families, and it can be authentic and real, but you have to face the reality. The world is different for all of you because this thing happened. But at least the relationship has some repair time. And you know you're not going to be talking about each other negatively to other people. You have each other's back. We're moving in the right direction, not sure where it's going to go. And then realignment. One or both parties may realize their earlier relationship was not ideal or healthy, and even to begin with, and that their newly defined relationship is better for both parties. This I see a lot, okay? I'm going to give you an example. In a church where somebody has no business being an authority, maybe authority goes to their head. Maybe they don't have the skill set. Maybe they're not mature enough. They're too young and they do damage. And so they get outside help. Mediator comes in, maybe even a consultant, and says, you guys should have never been in this situation to begin with. That situation brings out the worst of everybody. It wasn't fair to the person in authority. You shouldn't have been there. It wasn't fair to the person underneath that authority. Let's call it for what it is. That was a systemic error that we've got to make sure doesn't happen again. Can we recover something and a new setup from the relationship? And, you know, that can take many different forms, but I've seen that work out, where it's no longer hierarchical, you know, a power dynamic, an over-under thing. It's two brothers or two sisters in church that have value for each other's lives, know each other's lives, have some really good memories together before things went awry, but they eliminated the power dynamic or other dynamics that were hard to overcome. Does that make sense? Full understanding, forgiveness, an obvious sign of healing is taking place. The original situation, not fully recoverable, but the relationship is fully restored. And it's exemplified in the fact that maybe they used to go on vacations together, stopped when the major breach happened, but now they go on vacations, they meet up and so forth. And they're trying to recapture the essence of something that was really meaningful for both relationships in the best. So it's full. There's no more pressure or expectations. They've arrived to the best version in most situations. That's really the best version. However, the transformative one is similar to full relationship, but the relationship lands in a better place than before because of new learning. And religious circles is called redemptive. I call it transformative, and here's what I mean. I had, my wife and I got in a very serious conflict in 2009. We were mediating between two parties, and there were other extended parties in between the three couples that were part of this thing. there were like 5 races, okay? And mixed races and all the couples. Except Trish and I, just white Caucasian. So it was a tragic situation where there was a rape of an 18-year-old daughter. The daughter didn't want her parents to know, but one of the other couples did know. And couple whose daughter was raped, she didn't want her parents to know, and they didn't have any legal right to tell the parents. A lot of calls went into authorities about what's the best way to handle this. It was handled appropriate. But the parents were so upset and they asked the person to mediate. When we didn't come and take a side of the really painful parents, we were called racist. Then it got entertained as racist by the leadership of the Chicago church. And it was awful. So here I am for the next 2 years mediating for people. And back at home, I'm in this doghouse. It was just so painful. A lot of bad things happened in that time that showed the incompetence of our church staff in that topic. They were not competent in everything. They were great people, actually. They didn't know what to do. Once you get to the topic of racism, calling somebody racist, people go to their corners and say somebody else handled it. So, but the good thing hadn't happened. So my wife, this is the bad thing. She ended up losing 27 pounds in 1 month and going to the ER through the stress of all this. And after we got her help, took her out of the ER because they were giving her stuff that was making it worse. I made a commitment to her. I said, I'm going to go get a master's in conflict management. I'm not asking your advice or your opinion. I'm going to do it because we're going to get good at this stuff. I'll take money out of retirement. We're going to get good at this stuff. We're never going to let it happen again. So I did. I started the master's in conflict management that year. And in the middle of the program, I'm like, I want to do this. Then we got our first big consulting gig. And in between all that, somebody outside of the Chicago church said, Steve is helping out church. Stephen's Chicago. What's going on with the Statens in Chicago? So we had a mediation team come in. It went really, really well. We received apologies. We were grateful that the whole thing had happened because it bumped us. I would still be a minister of a strong ministry in Chicago, probably. We would, okay, we loved our work there. But what we've been able to do, because that happened, it just woke us up. There's a really good book called Necessary Ending by Henry Cloud. And where painful things happen to people professionally that are confusing, maybe not right, maybe not justice, but are God's wake-up call for us. Something else is supposed to be around the corner. Start looking for it, sort of thing. So I think for us, we had the transformative version, so forth. So, okay, what are you thinking? What are you feeling right now? What you heard so far? You got a story you want to attach to one of these versions of reconciliation? Yes.
Well, not so much to go into detail, but I do feel like in a small way, all of us in our marriages go through something that help us get to the transformative.
Yeah.
And how, because you're two different people and all the things you've talked about, it goes into the space of where you get deeper because a lot of times it comes through something that's painful. But if you don't get through that, you're not going to get to that strongest point. And I think that's one thing that I think we felt like, and you want to encourage people with that because it's not, it's a surprise a lot of times.
Right. Yeah, marriage is the biggest place this plays out, like you're saying, because when you really do get through it, you can even laugh about it. You can talk to others about it and use yourself as an example of, man, did we really blow it?
Yeah.
Here's how it turned out. That gives people hope. Humility, failure stories gives people hope. When I tell the story of this guy who I accused of being a stalker and then our encounter, people want to know that they're leading figures in their lives are telling on themselves, telling about their failures. It's easy to talk about our successes, but the failures are the ones that reassure the community. We're really serious about what God is doing in our life and moving us on the journey. So, any other comments? Yes.
I feel like I am a huge beneficiary of receiving forgiveness and going through a transformative process. So about 10 years ago, I came to light some really heinous sin that I was involved in. There were direct consequences for that impacted the family and impacted the church. And I remember going through that, feeling like it would have been so much easier just going to a different fellowship, leaving things as it is. But I'm so grateful that through that process, I was able to stay here.
Yeah.
As difficult as it was to have many conversations that I had with members of the church and even within my own family, and that I continue to have.
Yeah.
It is something beautiful that I've been able to see. That something so awful could be used for good.
Yeah.
And one of the areas that I saw that play itself out is, in some instances, what I had done, I will begin to realize that even though it is directly impacting individuals, it can trigger memories, trigger things in life that I may not have been responsible for directly, but I was able to be a proxy for asking for relief and be able to help that person heal. And that was something that was very eye-opener. And it's beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm curious also to hear maybe your thoughts on how much of that has to do with like a restitution. We see that in the Bible very often. And I love in the example of Zacchaeus offering to give back money that he had taken if he had done an error or unjust. And I'm not necessarily talking about monetary restitution, but just offering to make things whole.
Yeah.
Or things that had been broken because of sin that wrong with him.
When you shared your story with me the other day, I was moved by it. I think the arc of your story is very compelling and can be helpful for other people that are on an earlier stage of their own arc, you know. So I don't know about the restitution part, but the attitude for sure to say, hey, what do I need to do? What can I do to make this better? When I look back over my years as a Christian, and especially in leadership, when I found out sensitive stories in people's lives, the failures of some of my friends, including some that were elders from long before they became elders, became their gift because they were relatable. They had been humbled. They didn't look down on people because they hadn't been there. And then when you look at Hebrews, I think it's chapter 5, talking about Aaron, he could identify with people's sins, or the chief priest could. They had to seek forgiveness too, you know. And so there is something about a relatable, real, transparent person who will even tell their story. And if it's like an affair, they'll get the permission from their spouse or whatever, but they'll tell their story in such a way that they're becoming a priest to other people. So I think that's one of the gifts they can bring. So. Okay, so we're wrapping up soon here. There's this quote, but I want to tell you about the book in a second. It says, reconciliation stories are always works in progress. We often achieve one level of reconciliation, figuring out how to have a limited social relationship, for instance, only to have things shift later, enabling a deeper connection. Okay, that's kind of what we were talking about. Like, you have one and it kind of moves along. But I found this book at a used bookstore. And I opened it up, and on the inside cover was a long statement by a man to his daughter. They've been estranged for, I think it was 20 years, had not talked. And he was saying, I'm hoping this book can be a bridge for us to be able to get together. I don't know if he used the word reconcile, but that's what it looked like. be reconciled to his daughter. So he was the offender, he was the wrongdoer, lost a relationship with his daughter. That's really clear by the words on the inside. But when I looked at when the book was published and when I bought it in a used bookstore, it looked like it didn't work. Because why would that book end up in a used bookstore from father to a daughter so quickly and so forth? So, and I say that not to be discouraged, but say we are in the ministry of reconciliation. This is stuff that's important in society. And of course, we don't have to talk about the events of this last week to know we should be getting good at this. Understanding, self-awareness, the sources of conflict, the impact of culture, different belief systems, the being able to articulate things, finding one of the four motivations to forgive, looking at on a continuum the different ways that we can bridge. Just this last week, relationships ended with people I know just because of social media, going real extreme on one side or the other. And so let us be good at this. And so that's kind of what I'm hoping for. I love this picture here because I think we're all going to stand before God one day, right? And Steve, were you a good engineer? Won't be a question. Were you a great minister? Won't be a question. Did you manage your finances really? No, won't be. But were you merciful? Were you embracing the ministry of reconciliation, bringing people to Jesus, bringing people to each other, making things right? And so I hope that somehow connects with you. Do you want to have any closing comments tonight? Do you have any thoughts? Maybe something you heard here in this last part that you want to take with you? Yes.
I think that it is so, maybe I'm approaching this the wrong way, but it's so faith building to hear when your leader can say, I have been wrong.
Yeah.
I have done wrong to this congregation, this ministry. And I want you guys to know that I know that I did wrong and I'm going to work to fix it.
Right.
And hear that from leadership,
Yeah.
it really builds your faith that you're in the right place.
Right.
You know, so I really appreciate when that's the stance that leader takes.
I appreciate you bringing that up here at the end. You know, one of the things that, and by the way, from the recording, we were hearing the importance and the value of a leader taking responsibility, owning up before the public, being specific, because it encourages trust. There is I don't know if it's a statistic, but it's a well-known thing, that a church that has failed and the failure was handled in a great way does more to win over the congregation than a church that hides the failure, because a few people know about it. And then it starts to accumulate. And so we shouldn't be afraid to talk about failures properly, of course, through right process and investigations and so forth. But we're going to fail. We're going to fail again. So we want to be good at recovering. And the only way to recover is to really address it. And by the way, I mentioned this to a group the other night. I have a Substack of 4 articles I just started 2 months ago. And this is not a paid Substack thing, but there's articles that you will, I think a community like yours will like. But one of them is called "Does the Body Keep the Score?" It's something like that. It's about the physical body at first, because there's a book that says the physical body keeps the score of trauma. Another book says it doesn't. I say the church body, the collective body, does keep the score. And I talk about the kinds of things that can impact a community when they're not talked about, like elephants in the room, sacred cows, naked emperors, events that have happened that's in the minds of the members. And if possible, we want to go back and clean those up to the best, especially the ones more recent. It's hard to do that from 20 years ago. But so anyway, but what you said prompted that. Thank you very much, brother. Any other comments or questions? Okay, have a great Saturday. Thank you.